Ever seen a bar full of men go silent, not from fear, but because one woman refused to bow? She wasn't walked in. She was dragged, dirt on her face, wrists tied, but fire in her eyes. And in a room built to break her, she stood taller than any man ever had. That night in Ash Creek, they didn't expect her. And they sure didn't expect him to stand for her. The barroom smelled like stale tobacco and cheaper liquor. Sweat clung to the beams overhead like ghosts too drunk to leave. Lanterns flickered, barely cutting through the smoke, when the front doors flung wide open, and everything stopped breathing for a second. She didn't walk in. She was dragged. A young woman, wrists tied behind her back, boots scuffed to hell, her hair knotted and face streaked with grit. But her spine, straight as a rifle barrel, and those eyes, they burned. Not scared, not even tired, just angry enough to make the floorboards tense beneath her. "They call her Clara," the drunk man slurred from his makeshift pedestal, an old table covered in spilled beer. Harland Brewer, a bloated rancher with liquor on his breath and hate in his eyes. "Too damn wild for decent company," he said, pointing a trembling finger toward her. "Spits when she should serve, swears louder than any man here. What fool wants her, name your price. She ain't worth spit to someone who values order in his house." They laughed like they just heard the best joke in town. One man called her a feral mule, another barked that no saddle could hold her. The noise got louder, tankards banging, boots stomping, until Clara's voice cut through it like a clean blade. "You don't even know how to lead your own men," she said, loud and sharp. "You think you can teach anyone?" The laughter died in a blink. Harlan's face flushed deep red as he launched himself from the table and struck her across the face. She staggered, but didn't fall. When her knees buckled, she caught herself. Her lip bled, but she didn't reach for it. She just looked at him. Calm, steady, furious. And then, from the back corner, a man rose. Not just any man. Joseph, tall, broad-shouldered, skin the color of polished mahogany, with a walking cane carved smooth from years of use. The room reacted like someone had let a wolf loose. Men stiffened. The laughter choked in their throats. A black rancher, standing in a room full of white scorn, was already a spectacle. But when he stepped forward, slow and silent, all that air turned tight. "How much?" he asked, voice low, like thunder that didn't need lightning. Harlan scoffed. "You gonna buy trouble? Think that girl's gonna play house for a crippled man?" Joseph didn't flinch. He opened the leather pouch on his hip and let coins spill across the table. The clinking echoed like gunshots in that sudden hush. "I'm not looking for someone to serve," he said. "I'm looking for someone who won't break." He stepped to Clara, cut her free, and lifted her by the elbow. She didn't thank him. He didn't need her to. Their eyes met. Not tender, not soft, just understanding. They walked out together, past the men still too stunned to speak, out into the wind. And without saying a word, Clara walked beside the man who saw her storm, and didn't try to silence it. Clara didn't let the tears come. She lay still on the narrow loft bed, her gaze fixed on the exposed beams above. The wooden slats creaked faintly as the horses shifted in the barn below. This wasn't the first time she'd spent the night under a strange roof. But something about this place, too quiet, too clean, put her on edge in a different way. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like the absence of it, which she'd long ago stopped trusting. Before the first hint of daylight colored the sky, she was already on her feet. She worked by instinct, not invitation. Drew water from the pump, lit the stove, and swept the porch with practiced hands. She didn't ask what needed doing. She just knew that in someone else's space, doing something was always safer than doing nothing. By the time Joseph pushed open the door, moving slow with the help of his carved cane, Clara was crouched by the fence, scrubbing dried sweat from an old saddle. A pot of water had just begun to heat on the stove behind her. He stopped mid-step, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he placed something on the porch rail. A pair of worn leather gloves, softened with age, just the right size for her hands. "Don't act like you're hiding a crime," he said quietly, almost kindly. Work like you belong. Clara didn't respond. She simply reached for the gloves and slid them on. But in her silence, something shifted. A hairline crack appeared in the armor she wore so well. Later that afternoon, she was chopping firewood behind the barn when she noticed him again, standing by the doorframe, watching. Not to supervise, not to judge, just watching. She'd seen far worse eyes on her. These didn't scare her. Joseph returned to his chair by the hearth. His cane rested beside him. When Clara brought him a cup of coffee, he raised an eyebrow. "You don't owe me that," he said. She shrugged. "You paid for me." His jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "I didn't pay to own you. I paid to take you out of that mess. Same thing to most men. Not to me." The quiet that filled the space wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind that understood pain without needing to poke it. That night, Clara lay awake in the loft again. She listened to the slow creak of floorboards below, the soft groan of the fire, the wind slipping through the cracks of the cabin. She didn't trust Joseph. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't fear him either. And for a woman who had spent her whole life defending every breath, that was the beginning of something. The following days passed in rhythm. Clara rode the edge of the land each morning, her braid tucked beneath Joseph's old trail hat. Her shoulders were square, boots worn, movements certain. She checked the fence lines like she'd been doing it for years. Her voice was low but firm as she pushed cattle toward the lower field. Joseph watched from the porch, a quiet figure with eyes that missed nothing. Then one evening, she heard a sharp thud behind the barn. Dropping the brush, Clara ran. Joseph was on the ground, his body twisted awkwardly near the water trough, his cane lying far out of reach. "Don't move," she said, crouching beside him. He grimaced, not planning to. He froze halfway across the yard when he saw her crouched under the porch. Clara had dirt on her cheek, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hands buried in the cold soil like she was planting something sacred. "You hiding potatoes in there?" Joseph asked, voice lifted in rare amusement. Clara glanced up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "Nope," she replied, a faint smirk tugging at her mouth. "Lavender, forget-me-nots, daisies maybe, if the ground's kind." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "Didn't picture you the flower type." She didn't take offense. "Flowers grow in cracks. You just have to give 'em enough water." Her tone wasn't bitter. It wasn't hopeful either, just steady. "I don't need much. Just a patch of earth that doesn't spit me out." Joseph stood there a long moment, saying nothing. There was something different in her voice, something soft, buried under years of dust and noise. "My mama used to say every flower's a letter from the ground," Clara continued, patting the dirt around the seeds. "After she died, and I got passed around, I stopped having ground of my own. Just kept moving. Never stayed long enough to grow anything." She stood up, brushing her palms clean on her dress. He nodded once, slow and thoughtful, before turning and walking back toward the house. That evening, when Clara came back from watering the rose bush near the fence, she found something resting at the center of the dinner table. A bundle wrapped in old linen. Curious, she untied the corners and peeled back the cloth. Inside was an envelope, yellowed by time, its ink nearly faded but still legible. Seeds. She stared at it, fingers trembling just a little. When Joseph stepped in, hanging his hat near the door, she lifted the envelope. "These yours?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "My mother's. She saved seeds every spring. Said someday she'd plant 'em when the house felt right." Clara clutched the bundle against her chest. "Why give them to me?" He met her gaze, that still unreadable look she was learning to understand. "Maybe the house feels right now. Or maybe it just needed someone who knows what growing means." She didn't reply, just held the seeds tighter like they were something more than paper and hope. They didn't speak of it again. But something between them shifted. A warmth that didn't come from firewood or coffee, a quiet understanding that not all things broken stay broken. The next morning, the wind changed. It came from the south, full of dry sage and stirring dust. Joseph was chopping wood near the barn when he noticed a rider making his way up the path. A clean-shaven man in a pressed gray suit, the kind that looked wrong against the hills. Joseph wiped sweat from his brow, set down the axe, and limped toward the porch. "You, Joseph," the man called, voice slick. He nodded. "Who's askin'?" "Thomas Whitfield, land and title out of Cheyenne," the man said, tipping his bowler hat with a fake grin. "Just need to verify some paperwork. Routine." Clara stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on a cloth. She said nothing, just listened. When Whitfield pulled out the deed and unfolded it, Joseph frowned. He knew the land was his. His father had worked this soil with bare hands, but paper wasn't his language. "I'll get it," he said, turning. Clara raised a hand. "May I see what he brought?" The man hesitated. "It's just, I can read," she said plainly, already stepping down. She took the form, scanned it, then narrowed her eyes. "This ain't real," she said flatly. "Wrong letterhead. Clause here says if Joseph signs, he loses this ranch in 60 days over a debt he never owed." Outside, the wind danced through the tall grass, brushing against the shutters with a soft rattle. But inside the cabin, the warmth wasn't just from the flames crackling in the old stove. It came from something quieter, deeper. Two souls beginning to learn the shape of each other's presence. Clara sat at the table, sleeves pushed up, brow furrowed in concentration. Her pencil moved steadily across the ledger's worn pages, logging costs, repairs, and supply gaps with the care of someone who never wasted a number. Her braid was loosely tied, and a pencil rested behind one ear, forgotten in the rhythm of her work. Across from her, Joseph traced a weathered branding guide with his fingers, the leather edges curling with age. "That one," he murmured, pointing to a faint mark, "was from a ranch near Casper. Doesn't stand no more." Clara leaned in, squinting. "Looks like a hammer and a nail." He gave a dry grunt. "Every brand's a story, some proud, some haunted." She looked up. "What's yours say?" Joseph didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the guide before he finally spoke. "Mine says McCall." He paused, voice softening. "Carved by my father's hands, burned by mine, rebuilt. Slow." Clara didn't press. She turned a page, scanning the numbers again. "You're gonna be 6 sacks short of grain next month. You'll want to order soon." Joseph looked amused. "You talk like someone who used to balance a bank book." "In another life, maybe," she replied, lips twitching. "One where my shoes matched and I got tucked in at night." His smile didn't fade. "You've got a good head for it. Numbers. Order." She glanced at him, tone shifting. "I once told a man his cattle count was off. He called me a know-it-all and kicked me off the ranch. No pay. Then he was an idiot." Clara blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. Joseph leaned in, elbows on the table. "In 2 months, you've done more for this place than any 3 men I've hired in years. You mend fences, train horses, keep the roof from falling in, and you never ask what you're owed." She stared at the page. "I don't ask because I don't expect much. I figured if I worked hard enough, someone might let me stay." "They didn't?" "They all said the same thing. Too loud. Too stubborn. Too much." Joseph met her eyes and held them. "You're not too much, Clara. You're just more than most folks know what to do with." The silence between them was full, not empty, like the space between verses in a song. Then quietly he said, "Maybe you're not meant to be kept. Maybe you're meant to be chosen." Clara's expression flickered. "Chosen?" He nodded slowly. "By someone who sees all of you, not just the pieces they can control." She looked away, color rising to her cheeks. "Is that what you see?" He didn't look away. "I see someone made for more than what the world ever handed her." A smile tugged at her lips. "No one ever shortened my name before. They usually just yelled it." "Well," he chuckled, I'm not yelling. She leaned back slightly, relaxing into the moment. All right, Joe. He tapped the ledger gently. You skipped a number in the last row. She rolled her eyes. I didn't. You did, he teased, grin spreading. They sat there a while longer, fire snapping, wind humming outside. Two people who had never belonged anywhere, learning, maybe, how to belong to each other. Before she saw him, she heard the hooves. Clara didn't need to look. She knew that steady gait, the way the sound of his mount shifted over the hill. Joseph's shape emerged like something carved into the morning sky. Upright, calm, one leg still favoring the injury, but his steps never unsure. He dismounted slow, easing down with a grunt as his boot hit the dirt. For a moment he just stood, looking at her. Clara stayed where she was, sitting beside the shallow creek. Her arms rested on her knees, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. She didn't move, not even when he reached her. You slipped out before coffee, Joseph said, voice low. She didn't respond. His eyes fell on the satchel beside her, the way the breeze tugged gently at her braid, and the quiet between them stretched long and heavy. Then he asked, You really think I brought you on just to shovel hay? Clara looked up, her face unreadable. That's the only thing people bring someone like me in for, she said. Hard labor, short terms. I'm trouble when I show up and dead weight when I stay. You think this was pretend? Wasn't it? Her voice cracked. She caught her lip between her teeth, trying to hold back what had no name. Joseph stepped closer and pulled something from his coat. A piece of folded cloth, old but neatly kept. He held it out. She blinked. What's that? You dropped it the first day, he said softly. Found it by the stairs. Could have tossed it. But I didn't. Why not? Because, he said, voice like the ground itself. I knew one day you'd need proof that you belonged here. Clara stared. It was her mother's handkerchief, the one stitched with tiny blue flowers. She'd thought it lost long ago, somewhere between cruel hands and closed doors. Her lips trembled. You kept it? He nodded. From the minute you stood your ground in that broken barn, I knew you weren't passing through. You're the kind of woman a man builds around, if he's lucky enough to know what he's got. She shook her head slowly, her breath shaky. I'm not the kind men keep. No, he agreed. You're the kind men follow, if they've got the backbone. The creek ran soft beside them, like it was holding its breath. The wind brushed her cheek gently. Joseph extended his hand. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He simply offered, the way he would with a wild horse or a rusted tool or anything that required patience more than power. Clara looked at his hand, then at his face. Slowly, she placed her palm in his. Rough on rough. But together, they made something steady. He gave her fingers a single squeeze, not to trap, just to say, I'm here. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something deep inside her began to shift. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just surviving. She was choosing. Summer came in slow, wrapped in gold and the hum of bees. The ranch wasn't just alive. It pulsed. Clara rode fence lines, gave orders, patched brakes, and coaxed calves from tangled brush. She was no longer helping Joseph. She was running the ranch beside him. In town, they called her Miss Clara, rides like thunder. No one could match her pace. No one tried. She looked at him with a softness that only came after fire. The kind of man, she said slowly, who doesn't flinch from his past, even when it left scars. Joseph dropped his gaze for a beat. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of weathered leather, curved and darkened from years of sun and rain. He held it out between them, a quiet offering. It was an old horse rein, the first he'd ever cut with his own hands when he was just a boy. In the center, one letter was scorched deep into it. C. I ain't got no ring, he said with a low breath. Never thought I'd need one. He stepped closer, holding the leather steady in his palm. But this has been with me longer than anyone ever stayed. through battlefields, floods, winters so cold they cracked bone. It's the only thing I ever trusted to hold firm. Clara looked at the leather, at its faded edges, at the quiet weight it carried. Her throat ached as her fingers lifted, rough and tanned by sun and work. She didn't say anything, just took it. She looped the rein slowly around her wrist, letting it settle like something sacred. Then she looked into his eyes. "You never tried to own me," she said. "No," he replied softly. "You ain't something to own. You just stood beside me." "That's all I ever wanted," Joseph said. "To ride with you. Not ahead, not behind, just right here." They stood that way long after the sun slipped behind the ridge. No preacher, no papers, just soil and sky and the hush of wildflowers brushing their legs. And from that day on, the folks around stopped calling the land by its old name. They didn't say McCall Ranch anymore. They called it Wildflower Ridge, not just because the blooms took root, but because a woman did. Clara rode every morning at Joseph's side, through storms, births, broken fences, and blessings. And when strangers rode through and asked, "Who owns this place?" the town didn't hesitate. "She does," they'd say with a smile. "The woman no man could ever break." But one man did something else. He chose her. And she chose him back, chose him.